My mother did not whisper it as a warning. She stated it as a rule of gravity. Do not embarrass us. It was as if I were the stain on the family portrait, not the secret they had been hiding for years. I would have remained invisible if the father of the bride had not raised his glass, swept his gaze over the crowd, and asked the one question that silenced the entire estate. My name is Sarah Hayes, and as I stepped out of the rented sedan onto the crushed white gravel of the Sterling estate, I felt less like a guest and more like a smudge on a camera lens that someone had forgotten to wipe clean. The air in Newport, Rhode Island, tasted different from the air anywhere else I had ever been. It did not smell like salt or seaweed. It smelled like old money and exclusionary zoning laws. The ocean crashed somewhere below the cliffs, a rhythmic, expensive sound that seemed to keep time with the string quartet playing softly on the upper terrace. The mansion itself was a sprawling architectural statement that screamed power in a whisper. It was all gray stone, slate roofs, and windows that reflected the Atlantic Ocean, as if the house owned the water too. A valet in a white jacket sprinted back and forth, whisking away Range Rovers and Bentleys with the efficiency of a pit crew. I stood there for a moment, smoothing the fabric of my navy blue dress, which I had bought at Macy's 3 days earlier. It was sensible and completely invisible, which was exactly the point. My parents were already there. They had arrived early. Of course they had. Being late meant being noticed for the wrong reasons, and my family's entire existence was engineered to avoid the wrong kind of attention. I saw them standing near the entrance, flanking my brother, Daniel Hayes. The visual hierarchy was immediate and brutal. They were the sun and the moon, and Daniel was the earth they orbited. I was just a piece of stray space debris floating in the cold void. My mother, Eleanor, was picking a microscopic piece of lint off Daniel's lapel. Her hands fluttered over him with a nervous, possessive energy. She adjusted his silk tie, smoothed the shoulder of his custom-tailored jacket, and stepped back to admire him. Daniel stood there letting her do it, wearing that easy, practiced smile that had saved him from failing grades in high school and had ushered him into rooms like this in adulthood. He looked the part, I had to admit that, with his perfectly styled blonde hair and a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He looked like he had been born on a yacht. I approached them, my heels clicking softly against the stone. My father, Robert, saw me first. His eyes scanned me, evaluating, checking for damage before giving a stiff nod. He did not smile. He just looked relieved that I was wearing navy and not something flashy. Sarah, he said. It sounded less like a greeting and more like a roll call. Hi, Dad, Mom, Daniel. Daniel smiled and gave me a half hug, careful not to wrinkle his suit. Hey, glad you could make it. He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. It was a faint scent, buried under sandalwood and citrus, but I had known my brother for 28 years. I knew when he was terrified. My mother did not hug me. She closed the distance between us, her eyes scanning my face, my hair, my dress, searching for a flaw. When she could not find an obvious one, she settled for a general disappointment in my presence. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a register only I could hear. Do not embarrass us tonight, she said. It was not a request. It was an order. It was the same tone she used to tell me to stand up straight, or to get my teeth fixed. But she was not finished. She grabbed my forearm, her manicured nails digging in just enough to register as a warning. We are close, Sarah. Daniel is very close to closing this deal. Do not make this about you. No speeches. We do not need you trying to be funny or sentimental. And for the love of God, no talking about your research. No one here wants to hear about amputees or plastic limbs while they are eating canapes. It is grotesque. I felt the familiar burn in my chest, the one I had been nursing since I was 16. It is biomedical engineering, Mom. It is not grotesque. They are pediatric prosthetics. It is depressing, she hissed, cutting me off. And it bores people. Richard Sterling is a businessman, not a doctor. Just smile, nod, and drink your champagne. And please, do not mention that you are single. If anyone asks, you are dating someone who is busy. Do not look pathetic. I am not pathetic, I said, my voice steady despite the slight tremor in my hands. I have a PhD. I run a lab. You work for a nonprofit, my father interrupted, stepping in to reinforce the wall. You make toys for sick kids. Sarah, it is charity work. That is fine. But tonight is about Daniel. This is his night. This is his future. Just blend in. Blend in. That was the Hayes family motto for their daughter. Stand still, stay quiet, and try not to remind anyone that you exist. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say that Sarah is actually the director of the Cambridge Biodesign Institute and she just secured a massive grant for low-cost mobility aids. But Daniel just checked his watch and adjusted his cuffs. He was not going to save me. He needed this marriage to Chloe Sterling more than he needed a sister. Fine, I said, exhaling the word like smoke. I will be invisible. Good, my mother said, letting go of my arm. She smoothed her own dress, a shimmering silver gown that cost more than my first car. Go find your seat. We need to make the rounds with Daniel before the Sterlings come downstairs. They turned their backs on me in unison, a three-headed hydra of ambition, and walked toward the main terrace. I stood alone in the entryway, holding my clutch like a shield. I walked through the house. It was magnificent in that cold, museum-quality way. The ceilings were 20 feet high, hung with crystal chandeliers that shattered the light into 1,000 rainbows. Guests were beginning to fill the space, a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns. I recognized faces from the society pages and business magazines. Senators, hedge fund managers, tech moguls. This was not just an engagement party, it was a corporate merger. I found the seating chart on an easel near the terrace doors. I scanned the names, my finger tracing the calligraphy. The head table was front and center, reserved for the Sterling family and the Hayes family. The couple's friends were on the middle tier, business partners on the perimeter. I kept searching. Finally, I found my name, Dr. Sarah Hayes. I was at table 19. I looked at the layout of the terrace. Table 19 was not just in the back, it was practically in another zip code. It was tucked into the furthest corner of the lower terrace, partially hidden by a massive decorative urn overflowing with white hydrangeas and sitting behind a structural pillar. It was the kind of seat you give to the embarrassing cousin, or the unexpected plus one. I walked over. The table was set for 8, but at the moment, it was empty. From my chair, I had a great view of the stone pillar and the back of a catering station. If I craned my neck, I could see the ocean. I could not see the head table at all. This was no accident. My mother had helped plan the seating chart. I knew her handwriting on the drafts. She had put me here. She had physically marginalized me to make sure I could not accidentally wander into an important conversation. I sat down, placing my clutch on the table. A waiter appeared instantly, offering me a glass of champagne. I took it, not because I wanted to drink, but because I needed something to do with my hands. From my vantage point, or lack thereof, I watched the theater of the evening unfold. I could see the main crowd through the gaps in the floral arrangements. Daniel was in his element. He moved through clusters of guests with the grace of a figure skater. I watched him laugh at a joke I knew he did not understand. I watched him shake hands with a firm, two-pump grip that screamed sincerity. He was charming, handsome, and completely hollow. I saw a man in a gray suit ask him something, gesturing with a cigar. Daniel nodded seriously, made a vague hand gesture encompassing the horizon, and patted the man on the shoulder before stepping away. I knew that move. That was the "I have no idea what you just asked me, but I'm going to make you feel like we agree" maneuver. He was avoiding any real questions about his career. To the Sterlings, Daniel was an investment consultant with a boutique firm. In reality, Daniel had bounced between 3 startups in 4 years, none of which had survived his tenure, and was currently advising our father's struggling logistics company while looking for a golden parachute. Chloe Sterling was that golden parachute. Speaking of Chloe, I spotted her near the string quartet. She was stunning, but not in the same way my brother was. She did not look styled. She looked radiant. She wore a simple white silk dress that moved like water. What caught my attention was not her beauty, but her posture. She was leaning down to listen to an elderly woman in a wheelchair, holding the woman's hand between hers. She was not scanning the room for better options. She was present. A moment later, a waiter dropped a tray of empty glasses near her feet. The crash silenced the immediate area. Before the waiter could even blush, Chloe was on her knees, helping him pick up the shards. She was laughing, saying something that made the terrified young man smile. She was genuine. She was warm. She was completely unaware that she was marrying a man who looked at her like a line of credit. My stomach churned. I liked her. That made this whole charade infinitely worse. Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was a subtle, physical change, like the drop in barometric pressure before a storm. Conversations quieted, backs straightened. I saw heads turn toward the French doors. Richard Sterling had stepped onto the terrace. The father of the bride was a man who did not need to shout to be heard. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair and a build that suggested he chopped his own firewood on weekends. Despite owning half the eastern seaboard, he moved through the crowd with a quiet, terrifying authority. People did not just move out of his way, they parted like the Red Sea. He stopped to shake a hand here, to nod to a guest there. He was the gravity holding this entire world together. I shrank down in my seat, suddenly grateful for the hydrangeas. A man like Richard Sterling had no business with a woman like me. I was a biomedical engineer who spent her days in a basement lab trying to figure out how to make a prosthetic knee joint cost less than $50. I was not part of this ecosystem of high finance and blue blood. I took a sip of champagne and watched my parents. They had positioned themselves in Richard's path, but not aggressively. They were hovering, waiting for the perfect moment to be acknowledged. I saw them pause near a large glass panel acting as a windbreak for the terrace. They thought no one was watching them. I watched my mother check her teeth in the reflection. Then she turned to my father. She said something, and he adjusted his smile. He widened it, crinkling his eyes to look more approachable, less desperate. My mother nodded, critiquing the performance. They adjusted their posture, squaring their shoulders, lifting their chins. It was chilling. They were not two parents happy for their son. They were actors rehearsing a role called We Belong Here. They were terrified that at any moment someone would tap them on the shoulder and ask to see their tickets. I looked down at my hands. They were rough from lab work, nails clipped short and unpolished. I thought about the email I had received yesterday from my team in Cambridge. We had finally solved the tensile strength issue in the pediatric ankle joint. It was a breakthrough that would help thousands of kids in developing countries walk to school. It was the proudest moment of my career. "Do not embarrass us," my mother had said. "No talking about research." To them, my work was a parlor trick that did not play well at parties. To them, I was just the daughter who did not marry into money, the one who worked too hard for too little, the one who had to be hidden behind a plant so she would not ruin the aesthetic. I sat there in the shadows of Table 19, listening to the laughter of people who had never worried about the cost of an MRI, and felt a heavy, cold stone settle in my gut. I took another sip of champagne. It tasted bitter. I checked the time. It was only 6 in the evening. The night had barely begun, and I was already exhausted. I leaned back, resigning myself to 5 hours of silence. I would stay in my corner. I would keep my mouth shut. I would be the invisible haze. But as I watched Richard Sterling approach the spot where my parents were posing, I got the strange, sinking feeling that the invisibility I had been promised was about to be revoked. My parents were smiling at the reflection of the life they wanted, but they had forgotten that glass is transparent, and eventually, everyone sees what is behind it. From my vantage point behind the hydrangeas, I became an involuntary anthropologist of my own family. I watched my parents work the room with a desperation that was almost impressive in its sheer, sweaty tenacity. They were not just socializing, they were hunting. My mother had cornered a woman I recognized from the society pages as a trustee for the local art museum. I could not hear every word, but I could read the body language. My mother was leaning in entirely too close, her hand resting with feigned intimacy on the woman's forearm. She was doing that thing where she laughed a little too loudly at a comment that was not actually a joke, tossing her head back to expose her throat like a bird courting a mate. "Oh, absolutely." I heard her voice drift over the low hum of the string quartet. "Daniel has always been so passionate about the arts. We were just saying that once he and Chloe are settled, he is looking to join a board. He needs a creative outlet away from high finance." I nearly choked on my champagne. The only creative outlet Daniel had ever shown interest in was finding new ways to charge dinners to his corporate credit card, high finance. My brother was currently working out of a shared WeWork space, trying to pitch an app that pinned the location of clean public restrooms. But here, under the golden lighting of the Sterling estate, facts were malleable. My parents were trading Daniel's engagement like a futures contract, leveraging his proximity to the Sterling fortune to secure their own invitations to galas and board meetings. It was a masterclass in transactional relationships. They were selling access to a son they did not really know, to people they did not really like, for a status they could not really afford. I looked away, feeling a sudden wave of exhaustion. I picked up my phone, tempted to check emails from my lab, but then I remembered my mother's order. "No talking about research. Do not look pathetic." I put the phone down. "Is this seat taken, or is it reserved for the ghosts of ancestors past?" I looked up. Standing next to my table was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of expensive marble. She was older, maybe in her 70s, with a steel gray bob so sharp it could probably slice fruit. She was wearing a black tuxedo mate that made every ball gown in the room look frivolous. She was holding a martini glass with a single olive and looking at me with an expression of amused curiosity. "It is free," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Though I should warn you, the view is mostly bushes and the back of a waiter." She laughed, a low, dry sound. "Perfect. I have been trying to escape a conversation about polo ponies for 20 minutes. I hate horses. They are beautiful, but they bite." She sat down, crossing her legs with an elegance that made me sit up straighter. "I am Evelyn Vance." The name hit me like a physical tap on the forehead. Evelyn Vance. She was not just a guest, she was a legend in the medical technology world. She sat on the board of 3 major hospital networks and had funded half the biotech startups in Boston back in the 90s. "I know who you are," I said before I could stop myself. Then I shrank back, remembering my orders to be invisible. "It is a pleasure to meet you. I am Sarah. I know who you are too, Dr. Hayes," she said calmly, taking a sip of her martini. I froze. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass. "You know, the Cambridge Biodesign Institute," she said, checking the name off like an item on a grocery list. "The low-cost pediatric initiative. You published a paper 6 months ago on using recycled thermoplastics in variable load joints. I read it. The section on stress distribution was brilliant. A little dry on methodology, but brilliant." My heart skipped a beat. Someone here knew my work. Someone here had actually read the methodology section. "You read the paper? That journal has a circulation of about 500 people. Richard Sterling gave it to me," she said. The world tilted slightly on its axis. "Excuse me, Richard Sterling? The father of the girl marrying my brother?" Evelyn smiled, and this time there was a flash of mischief in her eyes. Richard is a voracious reader of anything related to mechanical engineering. He started his career in manufacturing, before the hedge funds and real estate. He loves the technical details of things. He has been following your work for 3 years, Sarah. 3 years. I stared at her, trying to process this. "That is impossible. My work is small scale. We barely have funding, which is why he tried to contact you," Evelyn said. She set her glass down and leaned forward slightly. "About 2 years ago, he sent an inquiry through a university portal. He wanted to discuss funding a pilot program for your variable load knee. He never heard back." My mind raced backward, rummaging through the mental filing cabinet of my memory. 2 years ago, I was drowning in grant applications and teaching lab classes to undergrads. I remembered an email. It had come from something generic, like the Sterling Group. The subject line was, "Inquiry regarding patent collaboration." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Oh my God, you remember it?" "I deleted it," I whispered in horror. "I thought it was a corporate buyout attempt. Sometimes we get these sharks who want to buy the patent rights and shelve the tech so it does not compete with their high-end models." I did not even open it. I just saw group and patent and hit delete. Evelyn threw her head back and laughed. It was a genuine, delightful sound that drew a few stares from nearby tables. "You deleted Richard Sterling. Oh, that is rich. He thought you were playing hard to get. Actually, he respected you more for it. He told me, that woman does not care about the money. She only cares about the work." I sat there, stunned. My parents had spent the last 5 years begging for a crumb of attention from people like the Sterlings. They had curated every inch of their lives to appear worthy of this circle. And I, the family disappointment, had casually tossed a billionaire's offer into my digital trash bin because I was too busy doing the work my parents despised. "He wants to meet you tonight, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He saw your name on the guest list. Well, he had to ask for the full list because your parents only put you down as a +1 initially." And his face lit up. "He is bored to tears with these finance guys. He wants to talk about thermoplastics." "My mother told me not to speak," I said, the irony tasting like ash in my mouth. "She specifically said no, talking about research." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She looked over my shoulder, and her expression hardened. "Well, speak of the devil." I turned around. My parents were marching toward us. They had clearly seen me talking to Evelyn Vance and decided I was ruining their social standing. They moved with that synchronized, predatory grace, smiles plastered on their faces, eyes darting to see who was watching. "Miss Vance," my mother exclaimed. her voice rising an octave. She ignored me completely, positioning herself so that her back partially blocked my view of the party. I am so sorry if our Sarah is bothering you. She can be quite passionate about her little projects. I hope she has not been boring you with technical details. On the contrary, Evelyn said, her voice cold and sharp. We were having a fascinating discussion about structural engineering. Your daughter is remarkably articulate. My father stepped in, placing a hand on my mother's shoulder, forcing a smile. You are too kind, Evelyn. Sarah is very dedicated to her charity work, but please do not feel obligated to entertain her. We know how valuable your time is. Charity work, Evelyn repeated, the words rolling in her mouth like a bad taste. I believe she runs a biomedical research center. Robert, that is not exactly a soup kitchen. My father stiffened. It was a microscopic reaction, a clenching of the jaw, a flaring of the nostrils. He had been corrected by someone he needed to impress, regarding a daughter he was trying to hide. He did not know how to process it. Of course, he stammered. Biomedical. Yes, we are very proud. You should be, Evelyn said. She stood up, smoothing her tuxedo jacket. I see Richard waving me over. Sarah, do not move. We are not finished. She gave me a wink my parents could not see, and then walked away, leaving a vacuum of silence in her wake. My mother turned to me the second Evelyn was out of earshot. Her face was a mask of fury. What did you say to her? She hissed. I told you to blend in. Evelyn Vance is one of the most influential women in New England. You do not just chat with her. She sat with me. Mom, I said, keeping my voice low. She wanted to talk about my work. Your work. My mother laughed. A short, cruel sound. No one wants to talk about your work, Sarah. She was being polite. God, you are so socially inept. She was probably looking for an excuse to leave, and you just kept rattling on. She said Richard Sterling reads my papers, I said quietly. My father scoffed. Do not be ridiculous. Richard Sterling runs an empire. He does not read obscure medical journals. Stop making things up to make yourself feel important. Sit there, drink your glass, and stop harassing the VIPs. They turned and walked away before I could respond, diving back into the crowd to repair whatever damage they imagined I had caused. I watched them go, feeling a strange mix of anger and pity. They were so terrified of the truth that they could not even recognize it when it walked right up and introduced itself. A few minutes later, Daniel appeared. He looked flustered. There was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip that the ocean breeze had not dried. He scanned the area, saw I was alone again, and hurried over. Hey, he said, checking his phone. Everything good? Mom said you were bothering Evelyn Vance. I was not bothering her, I said. She likes me, which is more than I can say for the rest of this family. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Look, just tone it down, okay? I am trying to close a conversation with a guy from a VC firm in New York. He is asking a lot of questions about my time at the logistics startup. The one you got fired from after 4 months? I asked. I quit, Daniel snapped. Creative differences. Anyway, I told him I was a managing partner there. If anyone asks you, be vague. Say I was in management. No dates. You told Dad you were telling people you were in consulting, I said. Now you are a managing partner, Daniel. You are going to trip over your own timeline. He looked at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw the panic underneath. He was 28, and he had built a life out of smoke and mirrors. He was going to marry a woman who thought he was bedrock when he was really just sand. It is just for tonight, he said, his voice pleading. Once we are married, it does not matter. The Sterlings have connections. I can get a real position then. I just need to cross the finish line. Please, Sarah, do not ruin this for me. I am not the one lying to your fiancé, I said. It is not lying, he insisted. It is projecting success. Everyone does it. Just stay put, please. He patted me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like he was checking to see if I was still solid enough to cause a problem, and hurried back toward the bar. I watched him intercept a man in a navy suit. I heard fragments of his voice as they walked by. Absolutely. When I was overseeing the London merger, Daniel had never been to London. I leaned back, shaking my head. The whole evening felt like a fragile glass sculpture balancing on a vibrating washing machine. It was only a matter of time before it shattered. I was staring at the ocean, trying to calm my racing heart, when a shadow fell across my table. I looked up, expecting my mother again, ready to scold me for breathing too loudly. But it was a member of the catering staff. He was young, dressed in the immaculate white uniform of the catering team. He was holding a silver tray with a single, fresh glass of champagne. "I did not order this," I said. "I am still nursing the first one. Compliments of the host, ma'am," he said quietly. He placed the glass in front of me. Tucked underneath the base of the flute was a small, folded square of heavy cardstock, the kind of paper used for very expensive personal stationery. The waiter gave me a quick, almost imperceptible nod, and then vanished back into the shadows of the pillar. I stared at the note. My pulse started hammering in my throat. I looked around. My parents were 20 feet away, laughing at something a senator said. Daniel was deep into his fabrication about London. No one was looking at table 19. I reached out and slid the paper from under the glass. I unfolded it. The handwriting was bold, slanted, and written in black fountain pen ink. It was not a generic welcome note. It was 3 sentences that gave me goosebumps. The stress distribution methodology was certainly brilliant, but the variable load joint deserves a better patent strategy. Save me the second dance. And then at the bottom, in smaller letters, "I know exactly who you are." There was no signature. It was not needed. I looked up, scanning the room. Across the terrace, near the head table, Richard Sterling was standing in a circle of men in tuxedos. He was not talking. He was looking directly at me. He raised his glass a fraction of an inch. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on mine. My parents had spent the entire night terrified of being found out. They had hidden me, hushed me, and erased me. But as I held that heavy cardstock in my hand, I realized something that made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. The only person in this entire zip code whose opinion actually mattered had known exactly where I was the whole time. The spell of invisibility had broken, and judging by the look on Richard Sterling's face, the real party was about to begin. The sun had started to sink below the horizon, painting the Rhode Island sky in bruised shades of purple and charcoal. The string quartet faded to a polite, final resolution, and the sharp, distinct chime of a spoon tapping against crystal cut through the murmur of 200 conversations. It was a sound that demanded attention, a Pavlovian bell for the wealthy signaling it was time to stop drinking and start listening. I was still sitting at table 19, with Richard Sterling's note safely tucked inside my clutch like a radioactive isotope. I had not moved. I had barely breathed. The champagne in front of me had gone warm, the bubbles rising in slow, lazy trails that looked like tiny pearls trying to escape a sinking ship. The terrace lights flared to life, washing the stone patio in a soft golden glow designed to make everyone look 10 years younger and a tax bracket richer. The staff moved silently to the perimeter, hands clasped behind their backs, blending into the hedges. It was time for the toasts. Chloe's mother, Catherine Sterling, took the microphone first. She was a woman of quiet elegance, wearing a deep emerald gown that needed no sequins to command attention. She stood next to her husband, her hand resting lightly in the crook of his arm, and when she spoke, her voice was warm, steady, and completely devoid of pretense. "When Chloe was a little girl," she began, smiling at her daughter, "she used to bring home injured birds, stray cats, and once, a very confused raccoon. She has always had a heart that looks to heal and to hold. We always wondered who she would choose to build a life with. We knew it had to be someone who understood that her kindness is not a weakness, but her greatest strength." She turned to Daniel. My brother was doing his best impression of a humble prince, hands clasped in front of him, head slightly bowed in rehearsed modesty. "Daniel, Mrs. Sterling said, "we are so thrilled to welcome you into our home and our family. You have made our daughters smile in a way we have not seen in years. That is all we could ever ask for. Welcome." The applause was polite, warm, and genuine. It was a perfect toast, short, sweet, and rooted in love. It made my stomach churn because I knew the man she was welcoming was a fabrication. She was welcoming a mirage. Then the microphone was passed to my mother. I watched Eleanor Hayes glide to the stage. She adjusted the mic stand, even though it was already at the perfect height. She smoothed her silver gown. She waited for total silence, demanding the room's complete attention through posture alone. She looked every inch the proud matriarch, the successful mother of a successful son. I braced myself for impact. "Good evening, everyone," my mother purred. Her voice was 2 octaves higher than her normal speaking voice, a tone she reserved for bank tellers she was trying to charm, and maitre d's she was trying to intimidate. "I am Eleanor, Daniel's mother, and this is my husband, Robert." She gestured to my father. who was standing a step behind her, looking like he wanted to melt into the landscaping. When we look at Daniel, she continued, we see a young man of such extraordinary potential. From the moment he was born, he had a presence, a light. He has always been the kind of person who draws others in. He truly has a gift for connection, a gift for seeing the world not as it is, but as it could be. I dug my nails into my palms. Potential, presence, gift. Those were the words you used when your son had no resume. She was talking about his vibes because she could not talk about his achievements. She could not say he was a captain of industry, so she said he was a captain of spirit. We are incredibly proud of the man he has become, she said, her voice trembling with carefully manufactured emotion. He is our heart. He is our legacy. And seeing him stand here today in this beautiful setting, joining this magnificent family, well, it is the culmination of everything we have ever dreamed of for our son, our singular son. I waited. I held my breath, waiting for the addendum, the obligatory footnote, and of course, we are so happy that our daughter Sarah could be here to celebrate with him. It never came. She smiled, raised her glass, and said, to Daniel and Chloe, may your life be as beautiful as tonight. The applause was enthusiastic, but I felt a cold, hollow void open up in my chest. It was not just that she had ignored me, it was that she had effectively erased me from the family narrative entirely. In her version of the story, the Hayes family had one child, one legacy, one source of pride. I was not even a footnote. I was a redaction. My father took the microphone next. He looked terrified. He held it like it was a live grenade with the pin already pulled. Yes, he muttered, clearing his throat. We are very happy. Daniel, you have done well. Chloe, you are lovely. To the happy couple. He handed the microphone back to the staff as quickly as humanly possible, practically throwing it at the poor waiter. He stepped back, wiping his forehead, looking like a man who had just survived a firing squad. The room chuckled, a low, forgiving sound. They interpreted his brevity as paternal stoicism, rather than the panic of a man terrified of saying the wrong thing and bringing down the house of cards. And then there was silence. A different kind of silence. Richard Sterling stepped forward. He did not take the microphone from the stand. He unclipped it, holding it in his hand, stepping out from behind the safety of the head table. He moved into the open space of the terrace, closing the distance between himself and the guests. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. The waiters stopped moving. The ocean wind seemed to hold its breath. Richard Sterling was a man who commanded gravity. Thank you all, he said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and calm. It was the voice of a man who had negotiated multi-billion-dollar mergers and stared down Senate subcommittees. It is rare to see two families come together like this. He paused, looking at Daniel. Daniel smiled, but it was a tight smile. The corners of his mouth twitched. When a man asks for your daughter's hand, Richard said, pacing slowly back and forth, you do certain things. You are a father, after all. You want to know who is coming into your house? Who is coming into your life? He chuckled softly, and the room chuckled with him. It was a nervous sound. So we looked into Daniel, Richard continued, his tone conversational, almost casual. We did our due diligence. Standard procedure. We looked at his background. We looked at his track record. My parents were frozen. I could see them from my corner. My mother was gripping her champagne glass so tightly I thought the stem would snap. My father was staring at his shoes. We wanted to know about his character, Richard said. Because character is not what you say at a cocktail party. Character is what you do when you think no one is watching. Character is what you build with your own two hands. He stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still in the center of the terrace. The silence was absolute. You could hear the waves crashing against the rocks below, a rhythmic pounding that sounded like a heartbeat. And in looking at the Hayes family, Richard said, his voice dropping a decibel, becoming more intimate, more intense, I found something very interesting. I found a discrepancy. The word hung in the air. Discrepancy. My mother's head snapped up. Daniel's smile finally broke, shattering into an expression of pure confusion and dread. Richard turned. He was no longer looking at Daniel, no longer looking at the VIP guests. He rotated his body slowly, deliberately, until he was facing the back of the terrace. He was facing table 19. He scanned the darkness, his eyes narrowing slightly as he cut through the layers of decorative hydrangeas and stone pillars. "I have heard a lot about Daniel tonight," Richard said. "I have heard about his potential, his presence, his gift." He paused. "But I have a question." He took a step in my direction, and his voice rang out clear and sharp as a bell. "Where is Sarah Hayes?" The question hit the room like a thunderclap. Heads swiveled. 200 people shifted in their seats, craning their necks, looking around in confusion. "Who?" The name rippled through the crowd in whispered echoes. "Sarah. Who is Sarah?" My parents went rigid. It was as if they had been struck by lightning. My mother's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. My father looked like he was going to pass out. Daniel looked at Richard, then at his parents, and then started frantically scanning the room, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and rage. He looked like a cornered animal. I sat frozen. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would bruise the bone. He had done it. He had actually done it. Richard did not wait for an answer. He did not need one. He knew exactly where I was. "Is Sarah Hayes here tonight?" he asked again, louder this time. It was not a question of curiosity. It was a summons. Slowly, I stood up. My legs felt like lead. My hands were shaking. I stepped out from behind the pillar, away from the safety of the floral arrangement. The movement caught the light. "I am here," I said. My voice was small, barely a squeak. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I am here." Richard saw me. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was the first time I had seen him smile like that all night. It was not the polite smile of a host. It was the satisfied smile of a man who had found exactly what he was looking for. "There she is," he said. His voice was warm, welcoming, and loud enough to reach the back row, tucked away in the back. He gestured to me with his free hand, an insistent, inviting motion. "Dr. Hayes," he said, "please come up here. Join us." The crowd parted. People turned their chairs around to look at me. I could feel their eyes, hundreds of them, sliding over my department store dress, my sensible shoes, my terrified face. I started walking. It felt like walking through a minefield. I had to pass the tables of venture capitalists, the hospital board members, the people my parents had spent the last 3 hours trying to impress. As I walked, I looked at my parents. They were looking at me with an expression I will never forget. It was not just anger. It was horror. It was the look of people watching their carefully constructed reality dissolve in real time. My mother looked like she was witnessing a car crash. My father looked like he wanted to be the car crash. I passed Daniel. He hissed at me, a sound barely audible over the wind. "What are you doing?" I did not answer him. I kept walking until I reached the open space where Richard Sterling stood. He did not treat me like an intruder. He stepped forward and offered me his hand, treating me with a level of deference that shocked the room and plunged it into a second, deeper silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard said, still holding my hand, turning me to face the crowd, "I would like to introduce you to the other Hayes." He looked at my parents, and for a fleeting second, the warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by cold, hard steel. "I noticed," he said pleasantly, "that neither of you mentioned her." The accusation hung there, suspended in the salty air, heavy and undeniable. He had not just introduced me, he had indicted them, and the trial was just beginning. Standing next to Richard Sterling was like standing next to a cliff face that had decided to wear a tuxedo. There was a solidity to him, a density of presence that made my parents' frantic energy seem like cheap static. I stood there with my hand still in his, and waited for the wave of nausea that usually accompanied public attention. I waited for the urge to hunch my shoulders, to cross my arms, to make myself smaller, but the wave never came. Instead, a strange, cold clarity washed over me. It was the same feeling I got in the lab when a complex equation finally balanced. The variables had aligned. The unknown factors were resolving. For the first time in my life, standing in front of 200 of the wealthiest people in New England, I did not feel like a mistake. I felt like the only real thing in the room. Richard did not let go of my hand immediately. He held it a beat longer than necessary, a physical anchor telling the room exactly where his allegiance lay. Then he let go, but he did not step away. He stood close, creating a visual unit. Richard, the host, and Sarah, the guest of honor he had personally rescued from the shadows. He raised the microphone again. The silence on the terrace was absolute. Even the ocean seemed to quiet down, the waves lapping in respectful calm against the rocks below. "For those of you who do not know her," Richard began, his voice echoing with that same terrifying conversational ease. Dr. Sarah Hayes is not just Daniel's sister. He emphasized the title, Doctor. He threw the word into the air like a stamp of authentication. She is the director of the Cambridge Biodesign Institute. Richard kept going. He was not reading from a card. He knew it. He had memorized it. She currently leads a team of engineers who are redesigning the way the world approaches pediatric prosthetics. I have been following her work for years. She developed a variable load knee joint that costs less than $50 to manufacture. It is being used right now in clinics in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa to help kids walk to school. He paused, letting the information sink in. While a lot of us in this room move money around, Richard said, his eyes scanning the crowd, resting briefly on some of his hedge fund peers. Dr. Hayes is moving humanity forward. She is doing the kind of work most of us only write checks for at tax time. She is building miracles in a basement lab in Boston. The reaction was immediate and visceral. It started as a ripple, a murmur of surprise, a sharp intake of breath, and then it solidified. I saw the faces in the front row change. The politely bored expressions vanished, replaced by genuine awe. People leaned forward. A woman near the front, the one with heavy diamonds who had been ignoring everyone, put her drink down and stared at me with wide, evaluating eyes. It was admiration. I recognized it, even though I had never seen it directed at me in a setting like this. It was the look people give to something valuable. My parents, however, did not look admiring. They looked like they were trapped in a nightmare where they were naked and everyone else was fully clothed. My mother's smile was still glued to her face, but it had become a rictus, a terrifying grimace of panic. Her eyes darted between me, Richard, and the guests, trying to calculate the damage. My father had gone pale, his hands clasped so tightly in front of him that his knuckles were white. Richard pivoted his body, turning away from the crowd and facing my parents directly. It was a small movement, but it felt like a tank turret rotating to find its target. Robert. Eleanor, Richard said. His voice was pleasant. It was cordial. It was the voice of a man asking a neighbor about their rose bushes. I have to admit, I am confused. My father made a sound that came out like a dry cough. Confused, Richard? Yes, Richard said. I have heard 3 toasts tonight. I have heard a lot about Daniel's charm. I heard about his smile. I heard about his, what was the word, vibes. A few people in the crowd chuckled, but it was a dark, nervous laughter. They felt the trap closing, but I did not hear a single word about the fact that your daughter is a leading researcher in her field, Richard said. I did not hear a word about the grants she has secured. I did not hear a word about the lives she is changing. He let the silence stretch. It was excruciating. It was a weapon. I noticed neither of you mentioned your daughter at all, Richard said quietly. Why is that? The question was simple, but it carried the weight of an indictment. He was not asking for an explanation. He was asking them to confess. My mother, to her credit or perhaps to her detriment, tried to fight back. She was a survivor of 1,000 country club skirmishes, and she was not going to go down without spinning the narrative. She took a half step forward, smoothing her silver dress, trying to reclaim the center of gravity. Oh, Richard, she said, letting out a breathy, airy laugh that sounded like breaking glass. You are so sweet to say all that. We are truly so proud of Sarah. Of course we are. We did not want to distract from the engagement. Tonight is about Daniel and Chloe. We did not want to overshadow their moment with technical details. She made a vague gesture toward me, as if my career were a spill she was trying to wipe off the table. We wanted to keep the focus where it belongs, she added, her voice gaining a little more confidence as she clung to the rules of etiquette. On the happy couple. Richard stared. He did not blink. He did not smile. He looked at her with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a particularly interesting, particularly malignant sample of bacteria. Distract, Richard repeated, savoring the word. Yes, my mother said, nodding eagerly. You know how it is. We did not want to bore the guests with shop talk. Bore them? Richard asked. He gestured to the crowd, to the 200 people currently hanging on every word. I do not think anyone here is bored, Eleanor. I think they are fascinated. He took a step closer to her. And as for distracting from the engagement, Richard said, his voice dropping to a register that was both intimate and incredibly loud. Most parents would call having a daughter like Sarah a highlight. Most parents would be shouting it from the rooftops. They would not hide her behind a pillar on the lower terrace. The mention of the pillar drew a gasp from the crowd. He had seen it. He had seen all of it, the seating chart, the isolation, the calculated erasure. My father flinched as if he had been slapped. My mother's mouth opened and closed, but her social reflexes had failed her. There was no etiquette rule for this. There was no polite way to say, "We hid her because she makes our son look like a failure." Daniel saw the ship going down and decided to try bailing water with a teaspoon. He stepped forward, his face flushed. His smile stretched so tight it looked painful. "It is true," Daniel announced, his voice booming entirely too loud over the speakers. He sounded like a bad actor, reading lines off a cue card he had never seen before. "Sarah is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. We always say that, right, Mom? She is the brains of the family. We are so proud of her." He reached out as if to pat me on the shoulder, but I took a subtle step back. His hand fell through empty air. "It is just that she is so modest," Daniel continued, sweating visibly now. "She hates being the center of attention. We were just respecting her privacy. That is all, right, Sarah? You hate these things?" He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Save me," his eyes said. "Lie for me. Be the good sister and lie." I looked at him. I looked at the brother who had spent his entire life sucking the oxygen out of every room, leaving me to suffocate in the corner. I looked at the brother who had let me sit at table 19 while he played Prince. I did not say anything. I just stared at him with a calm, neutral expression. Richard did not let Daniel off the hook. He turned his gaze on my brother, and the look of disappointment on his face was far worse than anger. "Modesty is one thing," Richard said. "Erasure is another." He turned back to the crowd, addressing the room at large. "When we did our due diligence," Richard said, "we looked at the Hayes family's track record. We like to know who we are doing business with. And you know what we found?" He paused. The wind whipped the tablecloths. No one moved. "We found a website for the Hayes family business," Richard said. "It lists Robert and Eleanor Hayes. It lists Daniel Hayes as the heir apparent. There is a bio for Daniel. There are photos of Daniel. There are updates on Daniel's various ventures." He looked at my parents. "But there is no mention of a daughter," Richard said. "Not one. We looked at your Christmas cards from the last 5 years. Daniel is on every single one. Sarah is on none. We looked at your social media. It is a shrine to an only child." He let that sink in. The cruelty, the systematic, deliberate removal of a human being from their own family. "She has been curated out," Richard said. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, almost as if she did not exist, as if she were a secret you were keeping. He looked at my mother, who was trembling now. The facade had cracked completely. Under the lights, she looked old, small, and petty. "I have to ask," Richard said, his voice filled with a terrible, quiet curiosity. "Why would you hide a woman who saves children for a living? What exactly are you ashamed of?" The question was unanswerable because the answer was that they were ashamed of themselves. They were ashamed that I was real, and they were fake. They were ashamed that I had achieved something they could not buy. Absolute silence overtook the party. It was the silence of a grave. The string quartet, the ocean, the clinking of glasses, everything faded away. The celebration was dead. The engagement party had become an autopsy. And Richard Sterling was holding the scalpel. I looked at the crowd. I saw Chloe, the bride, standing near the cake. Her hand was over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. She was looking at Daniel as if she had never seen him before, as if he were a stranger. I looked at Evelyn Vance. She raised her martini glass to me in a silent salute. And then I looked at my parents. They were standing in the rubble of their own ambition. They had come here tonight to sell a lie, and instead, they had been forced to buy the truth. Richard turned to me. The hardness vanished from his face, replaced by that warm, respectful anchor. "Well," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "the Sterlings do not hide brilliance. We celebrate it." He raised his glass. "To Dr. Sarah Hayes," he said, the most impressive person in the room. The toast was not for the couple, it was for the exile. And as 200 people raised their glasses toward me, I looked at my mother one last time. She could not meet my eyes. She stared at the floor, defeated by the one thing she had warned me against, the truth. It turned out, the truth did not embarrass me at all. The aftermath of the toast was not a celebration, it was a dam breaking. The moment Richard Sterling lowered his glass, the invisible barrier that had separated me from the rest of the party dissolved completely. I stepped down from the raised platform, my legs still shaking slightly from the adrenaline, and expected to fade back into the background. I expected the guests to clap politely and go back to their conversations about tax havens and summer homes. I was wrong. They swarmed me. It started with Evelyn Vance, who reached me first. She grabbed my shoulders with surprisingly strong hands. "I told you," she said, her eyes dancing with vindication. "I told you he knew." But before I could reply, a man in a velvet tuxedo interjected. I recognized him as the director of a major philanthropic foundation in Boston. "Dr. Hayes," he said, extending a hand. "I am absolutely fascinated by what Richard said. $50? You are manufacturing a functional load-bearing joint for $50. How are you managing stress testing on that budget?" "We use a honeycomb structure injected with a high-density polymer," I said automatically, retreating into the comfort of technical language like it was a warm coat. "It mimics the trabecular structure of human bone. It cuts material costs by 60% without sacrificing durability." "Brilliant," a woman behind him said. She was wearing diamonds that probably cost more than my entire lab budget for a year. "And the distribution?" Richard mentioned clinics. "We partner with local NGOs," I explained, finding my footing. "We do not just drop off the prosthetics. We train local technicians to fit and repair them. It is about sustainability, not just charity." More people crowded in. They were not looking at me with the pity or disdain I had seen in my parents' eyes for decades. They were looking at me with hunger. These were people who understood the value of a breakthrough. They understood efficiency. They understood impact. For the first time in my life, I was not the awkward sister or the disappointment. I was the asset. I answered questions about tensile strength. I answered questions about pediatric growth plates. I answered questions about the psychological impact of mobility on children in war zones. I spoke for 20 minutes straight, and for 20 minutes, I felt whole and completely myself. But as I spoke, a part of my brain kept tracking the movements of the people who had tried to silence me. I looked over the shoulder of a cardiac surgeon who was asking me about the FDA approval timeline. I saw them. My parents had retreated. In an ironic twist so perfect it felt scripted, they had backed themselves into the exact corner where they had originally seated me. They were standing next to table 19, half hidden by the overflowing urn of white hydrangeas. They were not socializing. They were arguing. It was a furious, hissed exchange. My mother was clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. She was whispering something venomous to my father, her face contorted in a mask of blame. My father looked like a man whose soul had left his body, leaving only a husk in a tuxedo. He stared at the ground, shaking his head weakly. They looked small. They looked petty. They looked exactly like what they were, people who had bet on the wrong horse and were now watching the race end without them. I felt a tap on my elbow. I turned to see Chloe, the bride. She did not look like the radiant, happy woman who had been floating through the party an hour ago. She was pale. Her eyes were wide and searching, and her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. "Sarah," she said quietly, "can I steal you for a second?" The crowd, sensing the importance of the bride, parted to let us through. Chloe led me a few yards away, toward the edge of the terrace where the stone railing overlooked the ocean. It was a little quieter here, away from the crush of guests. She turned to me. There were no pleasantries, no social buffers. "Did they really tell you to hide?" she asked. The question was direct. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor underneath. She was asking me to confirm that the people she was about to marry into were monsters. I looked at her. I saw the kindness in her face, the same kindness that had made her help the waiter with the broken glass earlier. She deserved the truth. "Yes," I said. "They told me to sit in the back. They told me not to talk to anyone. And they specifically told me not to mention my work because it was boring and grotesque." Chloe closed her eyes, letting out a breath that shuddered through her whole body. "Grotesque," she repeated. "That is the word they used?" "That is the word," I said. "I thought." She started, then stopped. She shook her head. "I thought Daniel was just being protective. He always said you were shy. He said you had social anxiety and hated crowds. He said he was trying to keep the pressure off you." "I give lectures in 300-seat auditoriums," I said softly. "I present at international conferences. I do not have social anxiety, Chloe. I have a family who thinks I am bad for their brand." Chloe stared at me, and I watched the disillusionment begin to fracture her expression. She was realizing that the man she loved had built a fortress of lies to keep her out. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I had no idea." "Excuse me." The voice came from behind us. It was hesitant, but firm. We both turned. Standing there was a young woman in a catering uniform. She was holding a tray of empty glasses against her chest like a shield. Her name tag said Tessa. She looked terrified. Her eyes kept darting toward the catering managers, but she held her ground. "I am sorry to interrupt," Tessa said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I heard it too." Chloe frowned, stepping closer to the girl. "What do you mean?" Tessa took a deep breath. "Earlier, when the Hayes family arrived, I was setting up the welcome station near the entrance. I heard Mrs. Hayes talking to Dr. Hayes. Tessa looked at me, her cheeks flushing. She told her to sit in the corner, Tessa said, reciting the memory. She told her, "Do not embarrass us." She told her, "No talking about research." She grabbed her arm. I saw it. Chloe stared at the waitress. "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am," Tessa said. Then she turned to me, and her expression shifted from fear to shy admiration. "I wanted to thank you, too. I am applying to biomedical engineering programs for next fall. I read your paper on the mechanics of low-cost prosthetics for my senior thesis. The section on reducing friction in the joint socket. It was incredible. It is the reason I want to go into this field." I felt a lump in my throat. This was the work. This was the legacy. Not the money, not the galas, but this. A girl holding a tray of dirty glasses who had read my methodology and decided to change the world. "Thank you, Tessa," I said, my voice cracking. "That means more to me than you know. Is there a problem here?" The voice was sharp, cutting through the moment like a serrated knife. My mother had materialized. She had clearly seen us talking to the staff and decided to intervene before any more damage could be done. She marched over, her silver dress rustling aggressively. "Sarah," she snapped, "why are you bothering the staff? She has a job to do." She turned her glare on Tessa. "And you should be clearing tables, not gossiping with the guests. I will be speaking to the catering manager about this. You are being incredibly unprofessional." Tessa shrank back, the color draining from her face. She looked like she was going to cry. "She was not gossiping," Chloe said, her voice ice cold. "She was telling the truth. Unlike some people." My mother froze. She looked at Chloe, her smile faltering. "Chloe, darling, surely you are not listening to a waitress. These people will say anything for a tip. She is lying." "I am not lying," Tessa said, her voice small but defiant. "Quiet," my mother hissed, stepping toward the girl. "Do not speak to me like that. You are a waitress. You are invisible. Do you understand? You are nobody." Eleanor. The name was spoken at a normal volume, but it carried the weight of a hammer drop. Richard Sterling was standing 5 feet away. I had not heard him approach. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at my mother with an expression of profound disappointment. "Richard," my mother stammered, instantly switching into damage control mode. This girl was being rude. I was handling it." "She was not being rude," Richard said calmly. "She was having a conversation with my daughter and a guest of honor." He stepped closer to Tessa. He did not look at my mother. He looked at the waitress. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Tessa, sir," she whispered. "Tessa," Richard said. "In this house, no one is invisible, and no one is a nobody. If you are applying to engineering programs, you should send your resume to my office on Monday. We have a scholarship fund for promising students in the sciences." Tessa's jaw dropped. "Sir, Go on now," Richard said kindly. "Finish your shift. You are doing a fine job." Tessa nodded, tears in her eyes, and scurried away. Richard turned back to my mother. He did not yell. He did not raise a hand. He simply looked at her, stripping away every layer of social armor she possessed. "Do not ever speak to someone in my house like that again," Richard said. "Power is not about who you can silence, Eleanor. It is about who you choose to listen to." My mother turned a shade of gray that matched the stone terrace. She opened her mouth to argue, to spin, to charm, but she found nothing there. The tank was empty. She turned on her heel and walked away, shaking with rage and humiliation. Chloe watched her go. Then she turned to look at the space where Daniel was standing across the room. He was laughing with a group of men, unaware that the ground beneath his feet had just liquefied. "He is just like her," Chloe whispered. It was not a question, it was a realization. She looked at me. "He is just like her, isn't he? The charm, the need to control the image. It is all a performance. He has his moments," I said, trying to be fair, though I did not know why. "But he learned from the best." Chloe nodded slowly. The look in her eyes had changed. The starry-eyed adoration was gone. In its place was the cold, hard calculation of a woman who realizes she almost bought a house with a cracked foundation. "I need to think," Chloe said. She squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Sarah. For being real." She walked away, heading not toward Daniel, but back inside the house. She needed space. She needed silence. I watched her go, feeling a deep sadness for her. She was a good person. She did not deserve this collision with reality. "You planned this." I jumped. Daniel had materialized beside me. He had dragged me into the shadow of a large decorative pillar, away from the prying eyes of the guests. His face was flushed, his eyes wild. He was sweating through his shirt. The charm was gone. The prince was dead. This was the real Daniel, the one who threw tantrums when he did not get the toy he wanted. "Excuse me?" I said. "You planned this," he hissed, jabbing a finger toward my face. "You set this up. You talked to Richard beforehand. You paid off that waitress to talk. You did this to humiliate me." I looked at him. I looked at the brother I had spent my life trying to please, to support, to protect, and I realized that he was not just selfish. He was delusional. "I did not speak to Richard until 10 minutes ago," I said calmly. "And I have never met that waitress in my life. She just happened to read a paper I wrote. A paper you would know about if you had ever asked me a single question about my life in the last 5 years." "Bullshit," Daniel spat. "You are jealous. You have always been jealous. You see me getting this life, this money, this family, and you cannot stand it. You had to come here and ruin it. You had to make it about you." "I did not make it about me," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Richard did. Because he respects the work, Daniel. He respects the truth. He saw a discrepancy, and he asked a question." "You should have lied," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "When he asked you up there, you should have said Mom and Dad were right. You should have played along. That is what families do. They protect each other." "No, Daniel," I said, stepping closer to him. "That is what accomplices do. Families support each other. You do not want a sister. You want an accessory." "You are dead to me," he growled. "Do you hear me? After tonight, you are dead to me." "I was already dead to you," I said quietly. "You just did not expect the corpse to wake up and have witnesses." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He had no answer for that. He had no script for a version of me that fought back. "I am leaving," I said. "I have had enough champagne, and I have had enough of you." I turned and walked away. I did not go back to the party. I did not go to say goodbye to Richard or Evelyn. I needed out. I found a side exit, a small door in the stone wall that led out to a cliffside path. I pushed it open and stepped out. The wind hit me instantly. It was cold, smelling of salt, seaweed, and vast, open space. I walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down at the dark water churning against the rocks. I took a deep breath. I filled my lungs with the cold air, letting it clear out the stench of expensive perfume and desperate lies. I felt light. I felt dizzy. For 28 years, I had been holding my breath, waiting for permission to exist. I had been living underwater, letting the pressure of my family's expectations crush me into a diamond they could sell. But tonight, the pressure was gone. I had breached the surface. I stood there in the dark, listening to the ocean, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel alone. I felt free. The morning after the engagement party, I woke up with a headache that had nothing to do with champagne, and everything to do with the emotional whiplash of being publicly vindicated and privately disowned. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since dawn. I had ignored every call from my mother and every text from Daniel. I knew what they would say. They would oscillate between blaming me for ruining their lives and begging me to fix it. I had no energy for either. Then, around 10 in the morning, a text came through from a number I did not recognize. "Richard gave me your number. I know you probably want to be left alone, but I need to talk to you. Not about Daniel, about you. Can we get coffee? Chloe." I stared at the screen. Chloe, the bride who had watched her fiancé crumble in real time. I hesitated to ignore it. I wanted to crawl back under my duvet and pretend the Sterlings and the Hayes were fictional characters in a book I could close. But I remembered Chloe's face on the terrace, the confusion, the kindness, the dawning horror. She was innocent in this. Collateral damage. I texted her back with a location. A small, independent coffee shop in downtown Providence, far enough from Newport that we were unlikely to run into anyone wearing a tuxedo or a monocle. When I walked in 40 minutes later, Chloe was already there. She was sitting at a corner table, nursing a large mug of tea. She looked different. The glamorous, ethereal creature in the white silk dress was gone. In her place was a woman in an oversized gray sweater and leggings, her hair pulled up in a messy bun. She looked tired. She looked human. I bought a black coffee and sat down across from her. "Hi," I said. "Hi," she replied. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Thank you for coming. I know my family is probably the last thing you want to deal with right now. Your father was actually the highlight of my evening," I said honestly. "It is my own family I am trying to avoid." Chloe managed a weak smile. "My dad has a way of doing that. He calls it leveling the room. He hates pretense. It gives him physical hives." She looked down at her tea, watching the steam rise. The air between us was heavy, but not hostile. It was the heavy silence of two people standing in the wreckage of a car crash, checking to see if they were bleeding. "I did not sleep last night," Chloe said quietly. "I stayed awake thinking, replaying things, and the more I thought, the more I realized I have been ignoring a lot of red flags." I took a sip of my coffee. "What kind of red flags?" "The way Daniel talks," she said. She looked up at me, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "He is charming. God, he is so charming. He makes you feel like you are the only person in the world. But every time I ask for specifics about his work, his past, his plans, he deflects. He does this thing where he turns the question back on me, or he makes a joke, or he gives me a grand, vague speech about ambition. He plays ambition," I said, the words slipping out before I could control them. Chloe's eyes widened. "Yes, that is exactly it. He plays it. He acts the part of a successful man, but there is no substance underneath. It is all smoke." She leaned forward. "I asked him once about a project he said he managed. He told me it was confidential, and he could not discuss the details. I bought it because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe he was the man he pretended to be. But last night, watching him panic when my dad asked a simple question, watching how he treated you," she shook her head. "That was not just a bad night, Sarah. That was a mask slipping." "Daniel has always been good with the mask," I said. "My parents taught him. They have been rehearsing that role since he was 5. Chloe studied my face. "Tell me, please. I need to understand why they hid you. You are incredible. You are smart. You are successful. You are doing work that actually matters. Why would they treat you like a dirty secret?" I sighed, tracing the rim of my mug. It was a question I had asked myself 1,000 times in therapy. "It is not about success," I said. "It is about control. And it is about image. My parents view life as a series of transactions. You meet the right people, you wear the right clothes, you say the right things, and you advance. Daniel fits that model. He is malleable. He will say whatever it takes to get in the room." I looked out the window at the passing cars. I was never malleable. I was awkward. I liked math more than mixers. I asked questions they could not answer. I did not fit the aesthetic. So instead of trying to understand me, they decided I was a problem to be managed. A liability. "They made you feel small," Chloe said quietly. "They made me invisible," I corrected. "It is safer that way. If I am invisible, I cannot say the wrong thing. I cannot embarrass them with my grotesque research. I cannot remind people that the Hays are not perfect." "That must have been very lonely," she said. "It was," I admitted. "But you get used to it. You learn to live in the corners. You build a life in the quiet places where they do not look." Chloe reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked like a printout of an email. "You know," she said, smoothing the paper on the table, "my dad did not just stumble across your work last week. He did not just Google you before the party. Evelyn mentioned he tried to contact me a few years ago," I said. I deleted the email. I thought it was spam. "He did try to contact you," Chloe said. "But even before that, do you remember the Innovator Seed Grant? The one you got right after you finished your PhD? The one that let you set up your first independent lab?" I froze. Of course I remembered it. It was $50,000. It was the money that had saved my career. I had applied blindly, a long shot for a young researcher without major backing. When I got the check, I cried for 2 days. I thought it was a miracle. "Yes," I said slowly. "It was an anonymous donor fund through the university. I never knew who it came from." Chloe slid the paper across the table. It was a copy of a wire transfer authorization form dated 4 years ago. The source of the funds was the Sterling Foundation. The beneficiary was Dr. Sarah Hayes. It was him, Chloe said. He read your dissertation. He thought your ideas on accessible engineering were revolutionary. He knew you would not take money from a corporate interest, so he funneled it through the university anonymously. He wanted you to have a shot. I stared at the paper. The numbers blurred slightly. Richard Sterling had bet on me 4 years ago. While my parents were telling me I was boring, while Daniel was telling me to get a real job, a complete stranger had quietly written a check that made my entire life possible. I felt a tear slip down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily, but another followed. He believed in me, I whispered. He did not even know me. He knew your work, Chloe said. And to my dad, the work is the person. He told me this morning, that girl has more integrity in her pinky finger than her entire family has in their bank accounts. I laughed, a wet, shaky sound. He really said that? He did. Chloe smiled, but her eyes remained sad. Which brings me to the hard part. She took a deep breath, pulling her hands back and folding them in her lap. She looked at me with a direct, unflinching gaze that reminded me so much of her father. It was striking. Sarah, she said, I need you to be honest with me. I need you to tell me the truth, even if you think it is going to hurt me. Especially if you think it is going to hurt me. Okay, I said. Are they using Daniel to get to my family's money? The question hung in the air between us. It was heavy. It was ugly. It was the thing we had both been avoiding. I looked at Chloe. I saw a woman who wanted to be loved for herself, not for her last name. I saw a woman terrified that her romance was actually a robbery in progress. I could have lied. I could have said, no, they love you. Daniel loves you. They are just intense. I could have protected my brother. I could have protected my family's fragile peace. But I thought about the grant. I thought about Richard Sterling reading my dissertation. I thought about the way my mother had looked at the waitress, Tessa. I thought about the years of being told to sit in the back. I looked down at my coffee mug. The black liquid was still and dark. I did not say a word. I did not look up. I just sat there, letting the silence expand, letting it fill the space between us. I did not have to speak. The silence screamed. After 10 seconds, Chloe let out a long, shaky breath. She nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She did not cry. She just seemed to deflate, as if the last shred of hope she had been clinging to had evaporated. I am sorry, I said finally. And I was. I was sorry for her. I was sorry that my family was a sinkhole that swallowed good people. Do not be sorry, Chloe said. She sat up straighter, wiping her eyes. Better to know now. Better to know before I sign the papers. She took a sip of her tea, her hand trembling slightly. I am not going to break up with him today. I cannot. It is too much. I need to process this. But things are going to change. I am going to demand full financial disclosure. I am going to ask for a prenup so ironclad it will cut off circulation. And I am going to ask him to explain, in detail, exactly what he does for a living. He will panic, I warned her. He will try to charm his way out of it. He will make you feel guilty for asking. Let him try, Chloe said, and her voice had a new edge to it, a core of steel. I am done being the good girl who just smiles and nods. If he wants to marry a Sterling, he is going to have to survive a Sterling audit. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm. Thank you, Sarah, she said, for not lying. I know that was hard. He is my brother. He is, I said, but you are my friend. Or I hope I can be. I think we are past that, Chloe said. Now we are bonded by trauma. It is a lifelong tie. We both laughed. And this time, it was genuine. It felt like the beginning of something real. I sat there for another hour with her. We talked about books. We talked about the coast. We talked about everything except the wedding. For the first time in my life, I was sitting across from someone from my brother's world, and I did not feel like an imposter. I felt like an equal. And as I looked at Chloe, I realized that my parents had been wrong about everything. The truth does not destroy you. It is the only thing that can build something that lasts. When we finally stood up to leave, Chloe hugged me. It was a fierce, tight hug. I am going to call my dad, she said. I am going to tell him we got coffee. Tell him I say thank you, I said. For the grant. For everything. You can tell him yourself, Chloe said, smiling. He has invited you to dinner next week. Just you. No parents allowed. I stepped out of the coffee shop into the bright Rhode Island sunlight. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Daniel. "You need to fix this. Call Mom. Now." I looked at the message. I looked at the command. I swiped my thumb across the screen and deleted it. Then I put the phone back in my pocket and walked toward my car. I had a lab to get to. I had work to do. And for the first time, I did not have to hide it from anyone. The retaliation did not come with a shout. It came with a calendar invite. 3 days after the engagement party, I was sitting in my office at the Cambridge Biodesign Institute, staring at a spreadsheet of tensile strength data, when a notification popped up on my screen. It was a meeting request from Dr. Andrew Carter, the director of the center. The subject line was blank. The time was now. Andrew was a man who believed in efficiency. He did not call meaningless agendas unless the building was on fire or a donor had just written a check with 6 zeros. I walked down the hall, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, feeling a prickle of unease that had nothing to do with my research. When I stepped into his office, Andrew did not offer me coffee. He was standing by the window, looking out at the Boston skyline. He turned, his face grim. "Sit down, Sarah," he said. I sat. "Is everything okay, Andrew? Is it the grant renewal?" "We received a communication this morning," he said, moving to his desk. He slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany surface. It was a printout of an email. It was CC'd to the Ethics Board, the Grant Oversight Committee, and the University Provost. It was anonymous. I picked it up. The text was short, formal, and devastating. "To whom it may concern, it has come to my attention that there may be significant financial irregularities regarding the allocation of the Innovator Seed Grant managed by Dr. Sarah Hayes. Furthermore, there are growing concerns regarding Dr. Hayes' mental stability and her capacity to lead a team in a high-pressure environment. We urge a full audit of her accounts and a review of her conduct before any further funds are released." I read it twice. The phrasing was generic enough to be plausible, but specific enough to be lethal. Mental stability, irregularities, those were career-pausing buzzwords. "Andrew," I said, my voice steady. "You know this is baseless. My books are open. Every penny is accounted for." "I know," Andrew said, rubbing his temples. "And I know you. You are the most disciplined researcher I have. But Sarah, when an accusation of financial mismanagement lands in the provost's inbox, we are legally required to initiate a review. Your accounts are frozen as of 9:00 a.m. pending an internal investigation." Frozen. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Andrew, we are in the middle of a prototype run. If I cannot pay the fabrication shop, we lose our slot. We lose months." "I am sorry," he said. I looked down at the email again. I recognized the syntax. Significant irregularities. Conduct. It sounded like a performance review from a corporate HR department. It sounded like my father trying to sound official. "This is not a rival lab," I said, placing the paper back on the desk. "This is personal." I walked back to my office, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure rage against my ribs. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "You need to fix this. Call Mom and apologize. Tell them you were drunk. Tell them you lied. Or I will make sure people see the real you." I stared at the screen. The real me. The unstable one. The difficult one. The one who needed to be managed. They were not just angry. They were trying to dismantle my credibility, so that if I ever spoke up again, no one would believe me. It was a preemptive strike. I did not reply. Instead, I sat down at my computer. If they wanted a war, I needed to know the terrain. I started digging. I did not look at family photos or text messages. I looked at the only place where the truth actually lived. Public records. I went to the United States Patent and Trademark Office database. I typed in Hayes, Daniel. I expected to find nothing. Daniel had never invented anything in his life, unless you counted a cocktail made of energy drinks and cheap vodka. But the search yielded one result. A provisional patent application filed 4 months ago. Title: Framework for Variable Load Suspension in Articulated Mechanics. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on the file. The abstract was dense, filled with legalese, but the diagrams were unmistakable. It was my knee joint. It was the honeycomb structure. It was the specific geometry I had spent 3 years perfecting. And there, listed as the primary inventor, Daniel Hayes. Listed as a contributor, Sarah Hayes. He had listed himself as the creator, and me as the assistant. I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to grip the edge of the desk. He had not just stolen my parents' attention, he was trying to steal my life's work. He was trying to monetize the very thing he had called grotesque. I looked at the legal representative on the file. Pearson and Hardman. I quickly searched the firm. They were a boutique intellectual property law firm in Boston. Their retainers started at $10,000. Daniel did not have $10,000. But 4 months ago, he had started dating Chloe Sterling. He had used the social capital of dating a Sterling to get a lawyer to steal his sister's invention, probably planning to flip the patent to a medical supply conglomerate for a quick payout once the marriage was secure. This was not a mistake. This was a strategy. I grabbed my purse. I did not go home. I drove straight to the headquarters of Sterling Industries in downtown Providence. I did not have an appointment, but when I gave my name to the receptionist, she picked up the phone, whispered 2 words, and then pointed me to the top floor. Richard Sterling's office was an expanse of glass and steel overlooking the city. When I walked in, he was standing by a whiteboard, staring at a schematic for a wind turbine. He capped his marker and turned to me. "Sarah," he said, "to what do I owe the pleasure? You look ready to hit someone." "I might be," I said. I did not sit down. My parents flagged my lab for a financial audit this morning, and I just found out my brother filed a provisional patent on my research 4 months ago. Richard's eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. He did not look surprised. He looked focused. "The honeycomb joint?" "Yes." "And let me guess," Richard said, walking over to his desk. He listed himself as the primary inventor. "Yes." Richard nodded slowly. "Smart. Evil, but smart. If he controls the IP, he controls you. He knew you would never sue him because he is family. And if you did, he would claim you were the erratic sister he was trying to help." "I need a lawyer," I said. "Not a family lawyer. A shark." Richard sat on the edge of his desk. He looked at me with the same intense scrutiny he had used on the terrace. "I can make a call. Sarah. I know the best IP litigator on the East Coast. She eats provisional patents for breakfast." "Thank you," I said. "But," Richard interrupted, holding up a hand, "I need you to understand something. I am not rescuing you." I blinked. "I am not asking for a rescue." "Good," Richard said, "because if I fix this for you, if I make the calls, pay the retainers, and scare your parents into submission, you will always wonder if you could have done it yourself, and they will always believe they only lost because of my money." He stood up and walked toward me, towering in a way that felt protective rather than threatening. "I will give you the resources," he said. "I will make the introduction. I will cover the initial retainer as a loan against your future grant. But you have to lead the charge. You have to be the one who signs the affidavit. You have to be the one who destroys him in court. Can you do that?" I thought about Daniel's text. "I will make sure people see the real you." "Give me the number," I said. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room that smelled like leather and intimidation. Across from me was Jessica Lawson, a forensic IP attorney who looked like she could dismantle a bomb with a fountain pen. She was reviewing the documents I had brought, my lab notebooks, the time-stamped server logs from Cambridge, the email chains with my team dating back 3 years. "This is not a hard case, Doctor Hayes," she said, tapping a red fingernail on the printout of Daniel's filing. "This is sloppy. He copy-pasted the diagrams directly from your published white paper. He did not even redraw them. He just cropped out the figure numbers." "He is not an engineer," I said. "He is a salesman." "Clearly," she said. "We can get this thrown out. We can file a motion to quash, prove prior art, and countersue for fraud. But to do that, we need to establish a pattern of behavior. We need to show that this is not an isolated incident of misunderstanding, but a calculated attempt to exploit you." She turned to her computer. "I am going to run a standard asset and liability check on you, Dr. Hayes, just to make sure there are no other financial entanglements with your brother that they could use to claim this was a joint venture." "Go ahead," I said. "My finances are boring. Student loans and a car lease." Lawson typed for a moment. Her face remained impassive, the blue light of the screen reflecting in her glasses. Then she stopped typing. She frowned. "Dr. Hayes," she said slowly, "you said you have a car lease and student loans." "Yes. You own property in Newport?" I laughed. "I rent a 1-bedroom apartment in Somerville. I definitely do not own property in Newport." Lawson turned the monitor around. "According to this credit report, you are the co-signer on a private commercial loan taken out 3 years ago. The principal amount is $250,000. It was secured against a commercial property in Newport. I stared at the screen. The numbers swam before my eyes. $250,000. That is impossible, I whispered. I never signed that. The loan was originated by a private lender, Lawson said, reading the details. The primary borrower is Robert Hayes. The co-signer is Sarah Hayes. She clicked on a document icon. A PDF opened. It was a scanned copy of a loan agreement. I saw my father's signature, and right next to it, I saw mine. It was a good forgery. But it was a forgery. The loop on the S was too wide. I did not sign this, I said, my voice shaking. What was this money for? Lawson scrolled down to the loan purpose section. Capital injection for startup enterprise. DH Logistics. DH. Daniel Hayes. I felt the room spin. 3 years ago. That was when Daniel founded his logistics company. That was when my parents told me how proud they were of him for striking out on his own. That was when they took me out to dinner for my birthday. And my father asked me to sign a bunch of insurance forms for my car because he was switching carriers. I remembered that night. I remembered signing 5 or 6 pieces of paper without reading them because I trusted him. Because he was my father. They had not just ignored me. They had not just hidden me. They had used me as leverage. They had used my credit, my name, my clean financial history to secure $250,000 for Daniel to play CEO. They forged my signature, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Or they tricked me into signing it. They put me on the hook for $250,000. And if Daniel defaults, Lawson said quietly, the lender comes after you. They garnish your wages, seize your assets, ruin your credit. She looked at me sympathetically. Dr. Hayes, this is not just civil fraud. This is identity theft. This is grand larceny. I sat back in the leather chair. I thought about the engagement party. I thought about my mother telling me not to embarrass them. They were not afraid I would embarrass them by being awkward. They were afraid I would embarrass them by being solvent. They needed me to be the invisible, compliant daughter. Because if I ever looked too closely at the books, I would see they had been cannibalizing me to feed Daniel. The betrayal was not a sudden event. It was not a single toast. It was structural. It was the architecture of my entire adult life. Dr. Hayes? Lawson asked. How do you want to proceed? I looked at the screen. I looked at the name Robert Hayes next to the fake Sarah Hayes. I remembered Richard's words. I supply the ammo. You pull the trigger. I sat up straight. The shaking in my hands stopped. Audit all of it, I said. Pull every record. Verify every signature. And when you have it all compiled, I do not just want to file a motion. What do you want to do? Lawson asked. I want to press charges, I said. Against all of them. The engagement party had been the moment the curtain fell. But this was the moment I realized the stage was rotting. The script was rigged, and the only way out of the theater was to burn it to the ground. The summons to the Sterling estate did not come with an engraved invitation this time. It came via a conference call request from Richard's personal secretary, scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. The location was the main house library. The agenda was simply titled, Resolution. When I walked into the room, the atmosphere was so brittle I felt a cough might shatter the windows. The library was a cavernous space filled with first editions and the smell of old leather, but today it felt like a courtroom. Richard sat behind his massive oak desk, his face carved from granite. Chloe was standing by the fireplace, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring at the floor. My parents and Daniel were already seated on the plush velvet sofas. My mother was trying to project an air of offended dignity, smoothing her skirt with sharp, nervous movements. My father looked like he was waiting for the results of a biopsy, and Daniel looked like a man trying to calculate the odds of surviving a jump from the window. Thank you for coming, Sarah, Richard said. He did not ask me to sit. He simply nodded at me, acknowledging my presence as a witness, or perhaps a prosecutor. Let us get right to it, he continued, his voice devoid of warmth. He picked up a folder from his desk. Chloe has some questions. Chloe stepped away from the fireplace. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her jaw was set. She walked over to the coffee table in the center of the room and dropped a document onto the polished wood. It was the patent application I had uncovered with my forensic lawyer. Daniel, she said, her voice low but carrying. I want you to explain to me why your name is listed as the primary inventor on a biomedical device that Sarah spent 4 years developing. Daniel looked at the document, then at me, and back to Chloe. He let out a laugh that sounded like air escaping a tire. This? He said, waving a hand dismissively. Honey, this is it is administrative. You know how startups work. We were protecting the IP for the family. Sarah is busy with the science side. She does not understand the legal framework. I filed it to keep it safe, so some big pharma company did not swoop in and steal it. I was doing her a favor. A favor, Chloe repeated dryly. By listing yourself as the inventor and omitting her name from the primary claim. It is a placeholder, Daniel insisted, leaning forward, his charm running on overdrive. We were going to amend it later, right, Mom? We talked about this. We were going to set up a family trust. My mother jumped in, eager to follow the script. Exactly. We were just trying to help Sarah. She is so scatterbrained with paperwork. We wanted to make sure the asset was secure for everyone. The asset, Richard said. He did not raise his voice. You mean Sarah's intellectual property? Which you tried to secure in Daniel's name using a lawyer. Daniel hired 2 weeks after meeting my daughter. Daniel flinched. That is a coincidence. Look, Richard, with all due respect, this is a misunderstanding. Sarah is confused. She has been under a lot of stress lately. The grant review, the pressure. I think she is lashing out because she is jealous. He turned to me, his eyes pleading and hateful all at once. Sarah, tell them, he said. Tell them you are just jealous of the engagement. Tell them you are trying to blow this up because you cannot stand that I am happy. I looked at him. I looked at the brother who had stolen my work, my credit, and my parents' love. I am not jealous, Daniel, I said calmly. I am ready to litigate. And I have a forensic audit that says you never contributed a single line of code or a single schematic to that project. You cannot even pronounce the name of the polymer we use. It is a composite, Daniel stammered. It is a non-Newtonian fluid suspension, I corrected him. And you just proved my point. Richard leaned forward. Here is the reality, Daniel. If you want to marry into this family, the era of smoke and mirrors ends today. I demand total transparency. If there is going to be a wedding, there will be a prenup that creates a complete firewall between your finances and Chloe's inheritance. And there will be an independent verification of every asset you claim to own, including this patent. Daniel went pale. I saw the panic rise in his eyes. It was not the panic of a man losing the woman he loves. It was the panic of a parasite losing its host. He looked around the opulent room, the ocean view, the security the sterling name provided, and he saw it all slipping away. We do not need to do that, Daniel said, his voice pitching higher. Richard, come on. We are going to be family. You do not treat family like suspects. I treat liabilities like suspects, Richard said. Daniel stood up abruptly. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the rug. Then he stopped and looked at me. Sarah, he said. Can I talk to you in private? Just for a second, please, sister to brother. I looked at Richard. He gave a microscopic nod. 5 minutes, Richard said. Daniel grabbed my arm, gently enough to look affectionate, hard enough to leave a bruise, and pulled me out into the hallway. He dragged me into the sunroom, making sure the doors were closed. As soon as we were alone, the mask dropped entirely. You have to fix this, he hissed, backing me against a table. You have to go back in there and tell them I had your permission to file that patent. You have to tell them I acted as your agent. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was already typed. Sign this, he said, shoving it at me. It is a letter of intent. It says we had a verbal agreement. If you sign this, the audit goes away. The fraud charges go away. I can explain the rest to Richard. I looked at the paper. I, Sarah Hayes, acknowledge that Daniel Hayes acted with my full knowledge and consent. I am not signing that, I said. You have to, Daniel yelled, his face twisting. Do you have any idea what you are doing? You are ruining me. I have debt, Sarah. Real debt. If this merger with the Sterling family does not happen, I am done. I need this. You called it a merger, I said quietly. You are marrying a person, Daniel, not a corporation. It is the same thing, he snapped. Grow up, Sarah. That is how the world works. You leverage what you have. And I had you. I had your little science project. And I had the Sterling connection. And I was going to make it work for all of us. Mom and Dad needed it too. Do you know how much money they sunk into my logistics company? They are broke. Because you stole it, I said. You and Dad forged my signature on a loan. We did what we had to do, Daniel screamed. Because you were useless. You were playing in your lab, making 50 grand a year while we were trying to build a legacy. Your success. God, your success is embarrassing. I stared at him. My success is embarrassing? Yes, he yelled, finally saying the thing that had been fermenting for years. It makes the family look weird. It makes us look small. You with your PhD and your grants and your saving the world bullshit. It makes Dad look like a failure because he cannot even run a trucking company. It makes me look like a joke. We had to manage you because if we let you shine, everyone would see that we are just ordinary. You make us look like frauds by comparison. The silence that followed was deafening. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. He had finally admitted it. They were not hiding me because I was embarrassing. They were hiding me because I was real, and my reality exposed their fiction. Wow, I said. That is actually the most honest thing you have ever said. Just sign the paper, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. Or I swear to God, Sarah, I will bury you. I will tell everyone you are unstable. I will tell them you. The sunroom door clicked open. Daniel spun around. Chloe was standing there. She was gripping the doorknob, her knuckles white. Richard was right behind her, and my parents were behind him. Chloe stared at Daniel. Her face was not angry. It was absolutely devastated. Chloe, Daniel said, his voice shooting up 2 octaves in panic. Honey, we were just discussing an intense sibling issue. You know? I heard you, Chloe said. Her voice shook. I heard you say it was a merger. I heard you say you needed this. No, that was just… I was emotional. Daniel reached out to her, stepping forward. Chloe, please. Chloe stepped back. She held up a hand, a physical barrier between them. You do not love me, she said. It was a statement of fact. You love access. You love the doors I open. You love the safety net. That is not true, Daniel cried, tears actually forming in his eyes now. Tears of frustration, not sadness. I love you. I want to build a life with you. You want to build a legacy, Chloe said. And you want to use my father's money and your sister's brain to do it. You are just a middleman, Daniel. You are a broker of other people's value. Richard stepped into the room. He was holding a tablet. There is one more thing, Richard said. He looked at my parents. My legal team just received a file from Dr. Hayes's forensic attorney. It regards the provisional patent application. My mother froze. We did not know anything about that. That was all Daniel's doing, really. Richard swiped a finger across the tablet. Because we subpoenaed the phone records from the lawyer who filed it. There are 12 logged conference calls between Daniel's number, the lawyer's office, and the Hayes family landline, including a call that lasted 40 minutes on the day the application was filed. He turned the screen around, displaying the call log. This was not a lone act by a desperate son, Richard said. This was a family project. You all sat down, discussed how to strip Sarah of her rights, and executed it together. You coordinated the theft. My father collapsed into a wicker chair, burying his face in his hands. My mother stared at the screen, and for the first time, I saw the fight drain out of her. She looked trapped. Chloe looked at Daniel one last time, took a deep breath, and slowly pulled the engagement ring off her finger. It was a large, flawless diamond that my parents had undoubtedly pressured Daniel to buy on credit. She set the ring on the table, right next to the statement Daniel had tried to make me sign. We are done, Chloe said. Chloe, please, Daniel begged, dropping to his knees. It was pathetic. It was a performance of grief, but the audience had already left the theater. Do not do this. We can fix it. I will withdraw the patent. I will do the prenup. Anything. It is not about the prenup, Chloe said, her voice cracking. It is about the fact that I do not know who you are, and I do not think I want to know anymore. She turned to Richard. I would like to go to my room, Dad. Go ahead, sweetheart, Richard said gently. Chloe walked out. She did not look back. The silence in the sunroom was heavy and suffocating. Daniel was kneeling on the floor, staring at the ring. My parents were standing like statues in the corner. Then, my mother's shock mutated into the only emotion she knew how to process: blame. She turned to me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a venom that had been distilling for 20 years. Are you happy? She screamed. Look what you have done. You destroyed everything, you selfish, ungrateful brat. We were so close. We were finally going to be safe, and you burned it all down because you could not just stay in your corner. Eleanor, Richard warned. stepping forward. But I did not need Richard to defend me anymore. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had told me not to embarrass her. I looked at the father who had forged my name. I looked at the brother who had tried to erase me. I did not destroy anything, I said. My voice was quiet, steady, and clear. I just stopped hiding the evidence. I walked past them. I walked past the ring on the table. I walked out of the sunroom and back into the library. I had a deposition to prepare for. And for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of what the record would show. The investigation into my professional conduct lasted exactly 14 days. It ended not with a bang, but with a 3-page PDF attached to an email from the university provost, CC'd to the entire board of the Cambridge Biodesign Institute. My parents and Daniel had hoped the anonymous complaint would trigger a scandal, a cloud of suspicion that would make me radioactive to donors and dangerous to employ. They had banked on the idea that in the high-stakes world of research, the mere accusation of financial mismanagement was enough to kill a career. They operated on the logic of gossip, where smoke always implies fire. But they had forgotten that I did not work in gossip. I worked in data. The audit report was, in Andrew Carter's words, a love letter to bureaucratic obsessive compulsion. The forensic accountants had gone back 5 years. They found that not only had I not misappropriated a single cent of the Innovator Seed Grant, but I had also personally subsidized the lab's coffee supply and paid for 3 rounds of intern stipends out of my own pocket when the budget was tight. The report concluded that my financial management was exemplary and unusually transparent. The university did not just reinstate my access, they issued a formal apology. My integrity, which had previously been a quiet personal code, was now a matter of public record, documented in bold, Arial font. With the grant review dead, the battle shifted to the patent. This was the part I had dreaded. I expected a long, drawn-out fight. I expected Daniel to drag it out, to lie on the stand, to force me to testify against my own brother in open court. I was prepared for it, but I was not looking forward to the bloodshed. It turned out, parasites do not fight when you expose them to direct sunlight. They just shrivel. My forensic IP lawyer, Jessica Lawson, requested a summary judgment meeting with Daniel's legal team. She brought one thing: a timeline. We had overlaid the timestamps of my original CAD files, created 3 years ago, with the creation dates on Daniel's provisional filing. It was humiliatingly simple. Daniel had not even bothered to rename the layer files in the design software. The metadata on his submission showed the files had been copied from a shared family cloud drive, which I had foolishly used to back up my dissertation data years ago, and pasted into a new document 2 weeks after he met. Chloe, Jessica put it bluntly to Daniel's lawyer, your client did not invent a variable load suspension system. He invented the save as command. We are prepared to seek sanctions against your firm for knowingly filing a fraudulent claim. Daniel's lawyer, a man who clearly realized he was not paid enough for this level of exposure, withdrew the patent application the next morning. There was no settlement, no negotiation, just a total, unconditional surrender. Daniel had tried to repackage his proximity to me into ownership over me, and he had failed. The morning the patent challenge was officially dropped, Richard Sterling called me. Is it done? He asked. It is done, I said. I was standing on the balcony of my small apartment, looking out over the parking lot, but feeling like I was standing on the top of a mountain. Good, Richard said. Now, we build. He invited me to his office, but this time, there were no wind turbine schematics on the whiteboard. There was just one phrase written in blue marker: the goal, scale. Richard did not offer me a job. He offered me a kingdom. I have been looking at the numbers, Richard said, pouring us both sparkling water. Your lab at Cambridge is working miracles, Sarah. But you are bottlenecked by grant cycles. You spend 40% of your time begging for money and 60% doing science. I want to flip that ratio. He slid a folder across the desk. I am proposing a new structure, he said. An independent, fully endowed philanthropic foundation. 5 years of guaranteed operating capital. We transition you out of the Cambridge ecosystem amicably. We will fund them as partners too, and we set you up in your own facility. You run the science. I handle the back end. Non-profit. No corporate shareholders demanding quarterly returns. Just the mission. I opened the folder. The numbers were staggering. $10 million in initial funding. A dedicated fabrication facility. Legal support. It was everything I had ever wanted. It was the dream. But the Sarah Hayes who sat in that chair was not the same Sarah Hayes who had walked into the engagement party 2 weeks prior. That Sarah would have said yes immediately, grateful for the crumbs. The new Sarah knew that even gifts came with strings attached. I closed the folder. I have conditions, I said. Richard smiled. It was a shark smile, but an approving one. I would be worried if you did not. I want a firewall, I said. Complete separation between the Foundation's IP and Sterling Industries. I do not want your corporate arm borrowing my tech for high-end medical devices in 2 years. The patent stays open source for developing nations, protected by a Creative Commons license that prevents exclusive commercialization. Agreed, Richard said without hesitation. I want governance, I continued. The board cannot just be you and your friends. I want 50% of the seats reserved for engineers and clinicians. People who actually know what a prosthetic leg feels like, not just what it costs. Done, Richard said. And, I said, taking a deep breath, I want transparency. Every dollar in and out gets published. If we are going to do this, we are going to be the anti-Daniel. No smoke, no mirrors. Richard leaned back in his chair. You negotiate hard, Dr. Hayes, but those are terms I can live with. In fact, they are terms I prefer. He picked up a pen and tapped the cover of the folder. I do have one condition, though, he said. Go ahead. What is the name? Richard asked. I took the liberty of drafting the incorporation papers. I called it the Sterling Hayes Pediatric Mobility Initiative. I stared at him. Sterling Hayes. My name right next to his. Not hidden in a footnote. Not buried in an acknowledgments section. Right there on the letterhead. You do not have to do that, I said. The Sterling name opens doors. My name just confuses people. Your name is the asset, Richard corrected me firmly. You are the scientist. You are the credibility. And frankly, Sarah, after the way your parents tried to erase you, I think it is about time we carved your name in granite. I felt a lump in my throat. Okay, I whispered. Sterling Hayes. Excellent, Richard said. We launch in a month. The news of the foundation hit the press 3 days later. It was a business story, but because of the Sterling connection, it bled into the society columns. Billionaire backs ex-fiance's sister in 8-figure philanthropic venture. And just like that, the rats came scurrying back to the ship they had abandoned. My parents requested a meeting. They did not ask to come to my apartment. They asked to meet at the temporary office space Richard had leased for the foundation's launch. They wanted to meet me on my new turf, hoping the smell of fresh paint and money would make me forget the smell of their betrayal. I agreed to see them, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I needed to close the door. They arrived looking immaculate, as always. My mother wore a suit that probably cost more than my first grant. My father wore his serious businessman tie. They walked in with smiles that were bright, brittle, and terrifyingly familiar. They brought a potted orchid. Sarah, my mother cried, stepping forward with her arms wide. Oh, darling, we saw the news. It is absolutely incredible. The Sterling Hayes Initiative. Can you imagine? She tried to hug me. I did not step back, but I did not hug her back. I stood there like a statue until she pulled away, her smile faltering slightly. We are so proud, my father added, looking around the office. $10 million. That is serious capital, Sarah. You are going to need help managing it. You know, I have a lot of experience with logistics. Stop, I said. The word was not loud, but it cut through the air like a whip. Please, I said, do not insult my intelligence by pretending you are here to help. You are here because the script flipped. You are here because I am no longer the liability. I am the ticket. Sarah, that is not fair, my mother said, her eyes filling with rehearsed tears. We are your family. We made mistakes, yes. The party was stressful. Daniel was under a lot of pressure. We were just trying to keep the peace. You were not keeping the peace, I said. You were keeping up appearances, and you were willing to sell me for parts to do it. I walked behind my desk, and picked up a folder. Here is how this works, I said. I am not going to ban you from my life. That would require an energy I do not want to waste on you. But the terms have changed. I looked at both of them. You can attend the public launch next month, I said. You can come to the galas. You can eat the canapés. But you will attend as guests. You will sit in the seats assigned to the general public. You will not be on stage. You will not be on the board. And you will never, ever speak to the press on my behalf. My mother looked horrified. But we are your parents. People will expect us to be involved. It will look strange if we are just sitting out there. It will look honest, I said. You spent 20 years telling me to sit in the back. Now you can see what the view is like from there. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but my father put a hand on her arm. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that was not fear or calculation. It was defeat. Eleanor, he said quietly. Leave it. My mother stiffened, then turned on her heel, and walked out of the office without another word. She left the orchid on the reception desk. It looked lonely. My father lingered. He stood by the door, twisting his hat in his hands. Sarah, he said. Yes, Dad. He struggled to find the words. I wanted to say, when you were in undergrad, when you were struggling with that first prototype, I told your mother we should help you. I wanted to co-sign that first apartment lease for you. I looked at him. But you didn't. No, he admitted. She said it would make you soft. She said we needed to save the credit for Daniel's ventures. She keeps score, Sarah. Your mother has a ledger in her head, and once you are in the red, she never lets you get back in the black. He looked at me with a sad, pleading expression. I just wanted you to know that I tried. I just could not fight her. It is easier to just go along with it. It keeps the peace. I looked at this man who had forged my signature to save himself from an argument. This man who had watched me be humiliated for decades because he was too afraid to tell his wife to stop. Dad, I said softly, you think Mom is the villain of this story. And she is hard. But do you want to know the truth? He blinked. What? She was mean, I said. But you were a coward. And honestly, the cowardice did more damage. Because you knew it was wrong, and you went along with it anyway. You did not keep the peace, Dad. You just made sure the war was only ever fought against me. He flinched. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. The truth, stripped of all family mythology, was just a cold, hard fact resting on the table. Goodbye, Dad, I said. I have work to do. He nodded slowly, put his hat on, and walked out. I was left alone in the quiet office. I looked at the orchid. I looked at the name on the door, Sterling Hayes. I realized then that my anger had finally evaporated. It was not replaced by forgiveness, some things cannot be forgiven, but by a profound sense of clarity. My parents were not monsters under the bed. They were just small, scared people who had built a cage of expectations and locked themselves inside. I was the only one who had walked out. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started drafting the foundation's bylaws. I had 100 emails to answer. I had engineers to hire. I had a world to change. And for the first time, I did not have to ask anyone for permission to begin. It has been exactly 365 days since I drove up the driveway of the Sterling estate in a dress I bought on clearance, terrified that the gravel crunching under my heels was too loud. Tonight, the gravel is the same. The salty air off the Atlantic Ocean smells exactly the same. The string quartet is even playing the same Vivaldi concerto they played the night my brother got engaged. But everything else has changed. This time, I did not arrive in a rented sedan. I drove my own car, a sensible but very sleek electric model I bought with my own salary. I did not walk toward the side entrance, the one reserved for caterers and embarrassing relatives. I walked straight up to the double mahogany doors at the front of the house. The valet did not ignore me. He stepped forward, opened my door, and smiled. Good evening, Dr. Hayes, he said. Welcome back. Thank you, I said, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to apologize for being there. The estate had been transformed. The terrace where I had once hidden behind a pillar was now the focal point of the evening. It was draped in silk banners of deep indigo and silver, bearing the logo of the Sterling Hayes Pediatric Mobility Initiative. The tables were set not for a wedding, but for a celebration of science and charity. I walked into the main hall. The noise of the crowd was a dull roar, the sound of 300 wealthy people discussing tax-deductible donations. But as soon as I stepped into the chandelier light, the noise shifted. It did not stop, that would be dramatic, but it changed frequency. Heads turned. People nudged each other. I saw Evelyn Vance near the bar. She raised her martini glass to me, a silent reminder of the night she found me in the shadows. I smiled back. I looked for my parents in the room. I found them. They were seated in the fourth row. Not in the front row, not at the VIP tables. They were in the general seating area, the seats reserved for friends of the foundation. My mother was wearing a gold dress that tried entirely too hard. My father was looking at his program with intense fascination, likely trying to avoid eye contact with anyone who knew the truth about the loan he had forged. They saw me. My mother sat up straighter. She put on that familiar, bright smile, the one she used to use when pretending we were a perfect family. She gave me a small wave, a wave that said, "See? We are here. We are supporting you. We are part of this." I did not wave back. I just nodded once and kept walking toward the stage. Richard Sterling was already at the podium. He looked a year older, but stronger. The last year had been hard on his family, the broken engagement, the public fallout, the restructuring of his trust, but he wore the wear and tear well. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard said, his voice booming over the speakers effortlessly, "thank you for coming." The room quieted. 1 year ago, Richard continued, we stood on this terrace to celebrate a union. That union did not take place. But something else was born that night. Something far more important. He looked over at me, standing in the wings. "We live in a world obsessed with image," Richard said. "We curate our lives. We filter our photos. We present the best version of ourselves, even if it is a lie. But science does not care about your image. Science only cares about the truth. And the truth is, there are children in this world who cannot walk because they were born in the wrong zip code." He paused. "Tonight, we launched the first global initiative, dedicated to fixing that problem. And we are doing it because one woman refused to stop working, even when she was told her work did not matter." He stepped aside and gestured to the microphone. "Please welcome the director of the foundation," Richard said. "My partner, Dr. Sarah Hayes." The applause was not polite. It was thunderous. It washed over me like a physical wave. I walked up the steps, my heels clicking on the wood. I stood behind the podium. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the venture capitalists who had once ignored me. I saw the socialites who had overlooked me. And I saw my parents, clapping enthusiastically, looking around to make sure everyone saw them clapping. I took a deep breath. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. "Thank you to Richard, for believing that a prosthetic knee was more interesting than a hedge fund. Thank you to my team, who are currently in the lab while we eat canapés, because they know the work does not stop for a party." I gripped the sides of the podium. "For a long time," I said, "I thought impact was something you had to ask permission for. I thought you had to wait for someone to hand you a microphone. I thought you had to look a certain way, or marry a certain person, to be worthy of being heard." I looked directly at the fourth row. "I was taught that my work was boring," I said. "I was taught that it was grotesque. I was taught that the best thing I could do for the people I loved was to remain invisible." My mother's smile faltered. She shifted in her seat. "But invisibility is a luxury we cannot afford," I continued. "The children we serve are invisible to their country's healthcare systems. They are invisible to insurance companies. If we stay quiet, they stay broken. So, I am done being quiet." I turned the page of my speech. It was time for business. "As part of our launch tonight," I said, "I am pleased to announce a significant contribution to the Foundation's endowment. As many of you know, there was a legal dispute regarding the intellectual property of the variable load suspension system." A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Everyone knew the rumors about Daniel. "That dispute has been resolved," I said. "The patent challenge has been withdrawn with prejudice. And as part of the resolution, full restitution has been made for the unauthorized use of research data. That restitution, totaling $250,000, has been donated anonymously to the Foundation." I did not say Daniel's name. I did not have to. The figure, $250,000, was the exact amount of the loan my father had forged in my name. We had forced them to liquidate the assets of Daniel's logistics company to pay it off, and then funneled it straight into the charity. It was poetic justice. Daniel's greed was now funding 3 clinics in Cambodia. "We are also expanding our board," I said. "I would like to welcome our new Director of Educational Outreach." I gestured to the side of the stage. Chloe Sterling walked out. She looked stunning, but not in a bridal way. She wore a sharp black suit. Her hair was cut into a sleek, modern bob. She looked like a woman who ran things. The crowd gasped. Seeing the ex-fiancé standing next to the sister of the man she almost married was a visual no one expected. Chloe took the microphone I offered her. "Thank you, Sarah," she said. Her voice was strong. "I learned a hard lesson this year. I learned that you cannot build a future on a foundation of secrets. I am proud to stand here with a woman who values truth over spectacle. And I am proud to help the next generation of engineers find their voice." She smiled at me. It was a real smile. born of coffee shops and shared trauma and the hard work of rebuilding. She handed the microphone back to me and stepped back, standing as my ally, not my accessory. I looked out at the audience one last time. My mother was beaming. She leaned toward the woman next to her, I think it was the mayor's wife, and whispered something. I knew exactly what she was saying. She was saying, "That is my daughter. We are so proud. We always knew she would do great things." She caught my eye, giving me a nod of conspiratorial pride, as if we were in this together, as if she had not spent 20 years trying to crop me out of the picture. I paused. I went off script. "One last thing," I said. The room went dead silent. I looked directly at Eleanor Hayes. I locked eyes with her. I let the silence stretch until she stopped whispering, until her smile froze, until she realized I was no longer playing the game. "I see my parents are here tonight," I said. My mother started to half stand, ready to wave, ready to accept the applause she felt she was owed. "Please, remain seated," I said. It was a gentle command, but an absolute one. My mother froze halfway out of her chair. She sank back down, the color draining from her face. "I want to be very clear," I said, my voice ringing out in the cool night air. "Success has a way of rewriting history. When you make it to the stage, people suddenly remember how much they supported you all along. They remember the encouragement they never gave. They remember the pride they never felt." I leaned into the microphone. "But the truth has a memory," I said. "You cannot hide me in the dark for 20 years and then claim me when I am standing in the light." The words dropped like stones. "You cannot hide me and then claim me." My mother flinched as if struck. My father stared at his lap, shrinking into himself. The people around them subtly shifted, creating a little physical distance, as if shame were contagious. I did not look away. I held her gaze. I wanted her to know that I saw her. I saw the transaction she was trying to make, trading my forgiveness for her social status, and I was rejecting the deal. "I was once told not to embarrass them," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that the microphone picked up and amplified to the back of the terrace. "I was told to sit in the corner, but looking at all of you tonight, looking at the work we are about to do, I realized something." I smiled. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated freedom. "The only embarrassing thing," I said, "would be pretending I belonged in the corner." I stepped back from the podium. For a second, there was silence, and then the applause started. It was not the polite, country club clapping of a year ago. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation. People were on their feet. Richard was clapping. Chloe was clapping. The engineers, the donors, the waiters, everyone was clapping. But they were not clapping for revenge. Revenge is cheap. Revenge is messy. They were clapping for clarity. They were clapping because, for a moment, the curtain had been pulled back, and the truth was the only thing left on the stage. I did not look back at my parents. I did not need to. They were just guests now. I turned to Richard and Chloe. We stood together in the light, three people who had chosen the hard road over the easy lie. I walked down from the stage, and I did not walk toward the shadows. I walked straight down the center aisle, my head held high, breathing in the ocean air, knowing that I would never, ever be invisible again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your car, your kitchen, or maybe your very own corner office? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed Sarah's journey from the shadows into the light, please make sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories. Give this video a like, and smash that support button so we can get this story to more people who need to hear it. See you in the next one.